So in the previous video, we came away with a couple of main points regarding regarding aggregate demand and the aggregate demand curve, and there are two things that we pretty much as a what do you call it, the rule of thumb. There's a word for it. I just can't think of it right now. But two things. Basically, we have what we would say here down at real GDP or output on our x-axis, and the price level or the percentage change price level, which is inflation, on the y-axis. And we're essentially saying that this demand curve, aggregate demand curve, is saying, this is our planned aggregate planned expenditures. This is what we plan to spend if the price level is here, so right about there, or here. And basically, aggregate planned expenditures is essentially your aggregate demand across the entire economy, what's being planned to spend, and at what price level. So you can just essentially consider that the aggregate demand curve, frankly. And a simple way to put that is we say, well, if we plan to spend this much, which means aggregate planned expenditures, if we plan to spend this much, which is aggregate demand, in return we should get this much. If we plan to spend this much, we should expect to get this much in output. So that was one of the main takeaways. The other main takeaway was this, is that spending, whether that's by, households, firms, drives output. However, price levels drive spending. So those are two of the heuristics. That's the word I was trying to think of. Heuristics. Those are two of the heuristics that we kind of came away with in the previous video. Okay, I cleaned that up a little bit. So now what we're going to talk about is shifts in the demand curve, and we'll kind of go through this fairly quick. I'm only going to go over three. I had a few more out there before, but let's talk about, obviously movements along the aggregate demand curve. That's when the BLS comes out and says, inflation went from, the price levels went from here to here. So just like in the simple supply and demand model, price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. On the aggregate model, our entire economy here, this is our entire macro economy, everything on the aggregate. Price level increases, then, of course, spending would go down. So price level goes up, spending goes down. Spending drives consumption and business investment, which means output will diminish. So that's our quick recap of, price level changes, movement along the curve. But what causes the demand curve to shift? There are about three things we can focus on here. We can look at consumer expectations in the marketplace. You can also consider expectation or consumer confidence levels. We can look at fiscal policy, which of course is policy, is government spending and taxation, and we can look at monetary policy, which of course is the manipulation of the money supply through the real interest rate. So we'll take these one by one. Consumer expectations. On the aggregate, if the economy looks bad, or if the consumer confidence survey from the University of Michigan, which we may look up next class, states that, and it's actually a metric you can find on Trading Economics, the change month to month of what consumer confidence looks like. If consumer confidence declines, right, then we'll just kind of make this come down here. If consumer confidence declines, that is going to lead to a little bit more austerity, to where households are going to spend less on the aggregate. So spending goes down, which will reduce output, obviously. So the demand curve, since this is not really a change in the price level, the demand curve here in this scenario is going to kind of look like this. It's going to shift over here. We'll call this AD prime. And this is what happens when we have a drop in consumer confidence, and especially expectations for future market performance or future economy performance. Obviously, the inverse would be true, right? The aggregate demand curve would shift to the right if consumer confidence went the other way, right? If we just, flipped all these arrows, your aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. So far, so good. What about fiscal policy? Well, fiscal policy, of course, is government spending and taxation. So let's assume that, the government spending has decreased. We were expecting those $1,200 COVID checks. They never came. They changed their mind. Bummer. And to add salt to the wound, the government decided they wanted to increase tax rates across the board. So if government spending goes down, that means there's less money. We'll just kind of do this. There's going to be less money stock in the economy. And there's going to be less disposable income. Less disposable income. We'll call this household income, which means, in turn, consumption drops. Nope, I don't know what happened there. Let me try that again. There we go. Okay. Meaning consumption drops. Yeah. So our taxes go up, our disposable income goes down, and since we used to have $100 in our wallet, now we have 50 because we got tax on it, and we were expecting a COVID check that never came. We're kind of stuck, so we have to really pull back on our spending, right? And again, spending fuels output, but again, this is not a change in the price level. If you rewind back 6 weeks, I said a change in price. That's a movement along the curve, but this isn't a change in price level. This is a change in something other than the price level, and that is the fiscal policies of the government with regards to government spending and taxation. So if there's less money supply, there's going to be less spending. So what happens here, same in last scenario, our aggregate demand curve is going to shift inward to there. Shifts inward. So AD is going to shift inward. And then, basically at every price level, since we were, we were kind of here, maybe. And now if the price level didn't change, which I'm assuming, I'm stating that it didn't, now we're here. But output at every price level, whether it's here or here or here or here or here, output at every price level is going to decline by that amount. So eventually, aggregate demand, which is spending, which fuels output, declines. That's how fiscal policy can shift the aggregate demand curve for the entire economy. Government spending and taxation. This is a direct influence on this model, on the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. Direct influence. The next one here, monetary policy, is an indirect influence. Given the Federal Reserve Bank's autonomy in setting monetary policy, primarily interest rates, which we'll look at now. So the Federal Reserve Board of Governors met at their FOMC meeting, and they decided that the economy could use a little boost. It's kind of stagnant, it's slowing down, and what can we do to boost that? Well, we can add more money supply, money stock into the economy. And how essentially could we do that? Well, one way, the most popular way, obviously, is for the Fed to lower interest rates. So if you lower interest rates, that's going to be an expansionary, as you know, expansionary monetary policy. So with interest rates declining, that means you're not going to get as much as a return in your savings, right? Your household savings. So that'll go down. With less household savings, then with more money stock in the economy due to that drop in interest rates, you're going to have an increase in household consumption, clearly. And with a decrease in interest rates, you'll also have firms, business investment will be more enticed to borrow funds for capital investment, business investment. So they're more enticed to borrow money, and that is putting more money into the economy as well. So the two components here, GDP, are going to have an increase. They're going to have a positive effect, or you could say inverse effect, to the drop in interest rates. And this is monetary policy that we have discussed previously. So with household consumption and business investment increasing, household saving going down, and business investment borrowing going up at every single price level. Again, the price level has not changed, but at every single price level, we're going to see an outward shift in the aggregate demand curve here. So aggregate demand increases, which means the demand for output, or excuse me, I should just say output, at every level, at every price level, is going to increase. So we go from here to here, go to here to here, but we are going to increase output as aggregate demand, which basically fuels output, is going to result in an increase in real GDP. And this, again, is expansionary monetary policy. As I stated previously, you could go through this example again and say, okay, well, what if we do a contractionary monetary policy? Contractionary. You flip these signs, right? We need to reduce the money stock right here. So by doing that, we increase the interest rate, and these all turn to the opposite side. So the inverse holds true, and that, of course, would mean that the AD curve would shift in. So those are the three main components of what affects the shifts, what shifts the aggregate demand curve. Those are the three big ones that we want to kind of study and get a grip on. Went over this in class today, so hopefully this video clears up a little bit of that lecture. If you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section or send me an email. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next video when we get into aggregate supply. Cool. Thanks for watching.